Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 62nd ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by ESPN NFL draft analyst Jordan Reid. Jordan, it's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Matthew. It's a pleasure, man. I love seeing young talent coming out here and doing well. So it's a pleasure being on here.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on and getting into kind of how you started to get into the industry as a whole. Your journey began, you were a quarterback at North Carolina Central University from 2010 to 2013 before coaching NCCU from 2014 to 2018. After that, you were a national scout and writer for the Draft Network from 2019 to 2021 prior to joining ESPN, where you currently work as an NFL draft analyst, as I just mentioned. When did you first know that you wanted to work in the sports industry, and how would you sort of describe the journey you've taken to get to where you are today?
Oh man, that's a great question. I actually always knew I wanted to be a writer, even when I was growing up. I was a
Mhm.
huge NFL draft fan. I was that
Yeah.
kid back when it was 2 days long. I sat in front of the
Mhm.
TV really from sun up to sundown.
Oh,
That's way
yeah.
before your time when the draft was 2 days long. It literally was from noon all the way through the end of the night. And I was
Yeah.
that kid that used to sit in front of the TV, and my parents would tell me, just go outside and play. Like, why are you in front of that TV all day long? But I was just so
Mhm.
infatuated with the draft, just finding out guys' background stories, knowing their story, and then also just seeing the next wave of players that were coming into the league. So my love for the NFL draft really started when I was a kid. And then my love for writing really carried on all the way through my college years, but I really couldn't focus on it because I was playing, obviously, and then
Mhm.
coaching as well. But once I stopped coaching in 2018, that's really where my love for writing, I
Mhm.
really got to expand on that. I started making YouTube scouting reports and
Mhm.
then also a personal blog as well. And I started my social media account then as well. So got the courage to publish some stuff. And then ESPN really came out of nowhere
Mhm.
once I got picked up by the Draft Network, worked there for 2 years, and here I am now.
Yeah, I love to hear that. And getting into the 2025 NFL draft, I want to talk about the Commanders. That is my favorite team. So just getting into them a little bit, their one of their biggest targets, at least with the 29th overall pick, is cornerback Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. He's extremely young, ran the fastest 40-yard dash of anyone at the combine, and would probably play on the outside, which would allow Mike Sanders still to work in the slot where he performs best and is most comfortable. That said, Harrison has a fairly small frame, weighs just 185 pounds. If the Commanders decide to draft Harrison, he would have to face wide receivers like CeeDee Lamb and AJ Brown 2 times a year in the NFC East. Do you see his size affecting him in one-on-one situations? And how do the Commanders know that they're not just drafting the next Emmanuel Forbes?
Yeah, that was going to be the name that I mentioned, just
Mhm. Yeah,
because that kind of
yeah,
has scarred a lot of Washington
yeah, yeah.
fans missing on that draft pick, especially inside of the top 15
Mhm,
or so picks. But Maxwell is much different than Emmanuel. I think his play strength is much better.
mhm,
He weighs much more too. I think he's about 20 pounds heavier. And then he's a really good athlete as well, more physical at the line of scrimmage. He does need to improve his tackling. I think that's a weakness in his game that I think he needs to work on. But the ball skills, the athleticism, the hips are really good as well. He can play man, he can play off man, he can play press man, he can play zone as well. So whatever scheme that Dan Quinn wants to implement with him, I think he would be a really good fit. Now it's just a matter of just the consistency. That's something that you want to see improve with him over the duration of his career. But I think he would be a really good fit in Washington.
Now, another interesting cornerback to take a look at is Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. He's more of a press corner, really uses his size to his advantage. If both Thomas and Hairston are available for the Commanders in the first round, who would you consider to be the better player at that position, given what the Commanders have right now?
They're a little bit different as far as who
Mhm,
they are as players. And as you mentioned, Azareye'h Thomas is more of your true traditional press man corner that wants to get in your face, run with you down the sideline. But also, he's really good in zone as well. He can play with his back to the sideline. But where his bread is buttered is press man. That's what he wants to do. He's very aggressive. He's very intense as well. Didn't run as well as he wanted to at the pro day. He ran the high 4.5s, low 4.6s, which is going to be alarming for some teams. So the athleticism obviously is a very big difference for those guys with Hairston running in the high 4.2s, which was a huge time for him. But the athleticism is very different as well. I think they're different types, but for me, I have Hairston ranked higher. But I could see Dan Quinn liking Thomas a little bit more just because of the length that he does have. His frame is a little bit more lengthy than Hairston. But if it were me and if we're just stacking who's better between the two and best available player, it would be Hairston for me.
And then kind of a similar thing when it comes to the safety position. The Commanders lost both Derek Forrest to the Bills as well as Jeremy Chin to the Raiders. However, in free agency, they picked up Will Harris and Jonathan Jones. However, the safety position still lacks a good bit of depth for Washington. Continuing to look at that 29th overall pick, if Xavier Watts, Malachi Starks, and Nick Amanwari are still all on the board, I know that's a big if. I don't know at 29 if they're all going to be there. Let's say in a situation where they are, do you have a preference between those three guys who have kind of been ranked pretty similarly throughout the pre-draft process?
I think this is the tough part about being on the
Mhm,
media side, honestly, Matthew, just
mhm.
because we're not stacking our big board for a scheme. So
Yeah.
stacking
Yeah.
safeties is always tricky. And the three
Mhm,
that you mentioned, all those guys are different. Eman Wari is that big overhang safety that really you want playing closer to the line of scrimmage and sprinkling in some of those what I like to call on the roof reps as far as a single
mhm,
high safety. But with Malachi and then also Watts, those are guys that really can play all over the secondary, and they can spend more time on the roof of the defense just because they're a
mhm.
little bit more fluid
Yeah.
in their hips. I like Stark better.
Mhm.
Stark's better if we just had to choose between the three, just because I think Malachi is so special as far as he can play in the nickel, he can play free safety, he can come down in the box and play strong safety as well. So just that versatility, that is something that I love to see in safeties.
Now, something that you mentioned recently on SportsCenter really caught my eye. You called this draft the best running back class since 2017, and you talked about how the Commanders could potentially draft Ohio State running back Travion Henderson in the first round. What interests you so much when it comes to Henderson's playstyle, as well as his general fit with Washington, of course, with Eckler and Robinson both entering the final year of their contract?
I think that's a big part of it. Both of those guys being in the final year of their deals. And whenever it's a deep class, especially at a position like running
Mhm.
back, even if I don't need one, I'm going to take one anyway, just because
Yeah.
you could
Mhm.
luck into a special one. And I think Travion Henderson is one of the better ones in this year's class. He's actually my third ranked running back behind Ashton Genty as well as Amari and Hampton.
Yep.
But I think where he differentiates himself from a lot of backs in this year's class is just the pass protection aspect. He's really good at pass protection. And then
Mhm.
you add on just how versatile he is as a runner. And then he's a home run threat
Mhm.
as well. So just the totality of that package. And then you add on how he's able to catch out of the backfield as well. He just continues to check every single box as far as what you want out of the three down running back. So pairing him with B Rob and then also with Eckler in 2025, I definitely think that would be advantageous
Mhm.
for Washington. And then also, he's the one guy that you would have already in the future.
And drifting away from the Commanders, the Jets obviously have the seventh overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. And right now, it's felt more and more like they've narrowed it down to three main options: Tyler Warren from Penn State, Armand Membu from Missouri, and Will Campbell from LSU. However, it seems more likely that Campbell will get drafted by the Patriots at pick number 4. People are talking a lot about Warren and Membu. However, based on what you've heard, are there any other sleepers that you could potentially see the Jets targeting with the seventh overall pick?
I think those are your key guys. Those three, I think that's what the decision is going to come down to, especially with Morgan Moses now gone to New England. So
Mhm,
you could pick between Campbell, swinging him over to the right side with him playing only on the left side at LSU, but with Mimbu, he's already only played on that right side during his time at Mizzou. So if it came down to it, I would take Armand Mimbu just because I think the tape was better, even though the measurables aren't as good from a height
mhm,
and weight perspective as Will Campbell. The arm length is better. And then I just think he's one of the more underrated players in this year's
mhm.
class, in my honest opinion. So I would go with Mimbu if I had to take one, if I could only take one guy at 7.
Yeah, now a few days ago, it was announced that Derek Carr's 2025 season is at risk due to a shoulder injury. And recently, it's felt like the Steelers were the clear favorites to sign Aaron Rodgers, but now the Saints have entered that conversation as well with questions surrounding Carr. If you were New Orleans, would you rather try and go out and sign Rodgers or potentially take a quarterback with the ninth overall pick, looking at a Shador Sanders or a Jackson Dart type of player?
I would rather draft a quarterback. I just
Mhm.
wouldn't want any part of Rodgers just because of all the variables that he comes with. And, I think he's really just a name at this point in his career, and the
Mhm.
production really doesn't match the name of what we saw
Yeah.
during the prime of his career. And then the other stops that he's been, he just hasn't been as productive as what we have seen in his
Mhm.
prime as well. So I would rather take the cheaper option with a young quarterback, especially with me already having to pay Carr really past the 2026 season. So the one way to alleviate having that expensive quarterback against my salary cap is to have a young option.
Now, I think Jackson Dart, who I mentioned, is a very interesting player to watch throughout this entire process because he feels like a guy that has been rumored to go in the top 10. And then there's also days where maybe it looks like he could be a second round draft pick. You look at a team like the Steelers, as I mentioned, if the Saints end up taking a rookie quarterback off the board, would it be more realistic for the Saint or for the Steelers to then go after Aaron Rodgers if Shador's taken, or potentially take Jackson Dart at number 24?
Like I said, I would rather take a young quarterback. I
Yeah.
wouldn't want any part of the Rodgers stuff if I'm a
Mhm.
general manager, but that's just my opinion. Now, what I think is going to happen, I think Rodgers ultimately ends up going to Pittsburgh just because they have a
Mhm.
win now mentality.
Yeah.
And I don't think Mike Tomlin wants to wait on a young quarterback. So if it were me, I would rather draft a young quarterback as opposed to assigning Aaron Rodgers.
So then in that case, do you see a world where Jackson Dart potentially comes a day 2 pick?
It's possible, but I
Mhm.
think, let's say if Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter go 2 and 3 in some order to Cleveland and then also the Giants. Now, both of those teams having the top two picks in the
Yeah.
second round, either one of them could trade up in order to get Jackson Dart.
Now, another quarterback to keep tabs on recently has been Jalen Milroe, who obviously presents great athleticism. However, he could use a little work when it comes to short and intermediate accuracy, as you mentioned on SportsCenter the other day. For Milroe, what do you see as the highest he could potentially be drafted, as well as the lowest? And I know he was one of the 17 players that will be attending the first round of the draft. Is there a situation where maybe he does actually get drafted on day 1?
Yeah, I think it's possible, especially as the two teams that I mentioned a couple of seconds ago with Cleveland and then also the Giants, both of them still having needs for a young quarterback. I could see them wanting to get that fifth year option and having or going on or be welcoming to the task of developing Jalen Milroe, especially with the Giants. They already have Russell Wilson as well as Jameis Winston in place. So they really have time to develop a young quarterback like Jalen Milroe, who still needs a lot of refinement as a passer.
And going back to Washington real quick, when you look at their wide receiver room, it obviously got a lot better after adding Debo Samuel, and then you still have Terry McLaurin. Those are two guys who could play in the slot, but not necessarily their primary area that they like to work. Right now, I'd say the two main slot receivers for Washington are KJ Osborne and Luke McCaffrey. So if they want to target maybe a third or fourth round wide receiver towards the end of the draft, very low risk, high reward situation to get more depth at that slot area, who could they potentially go after?
Yeah. Well, two guys really come to mind for me. Ty Felton out of Maryland is
Yeah.
one that I have a lot of intrigue in, who got off to a really good start, but they
Yeah.
faced some inconsistencies at quarterback after that, and his numbers really suffered after that. So he's one that I think is primarily going to have to live in the slot on the next level, but also he can play some outside as well, has a really good catch radius, really strong at the catch point too. And then if you're looking for a late round dart throw, Jimmy Horn Jr. out of Colorado. He's one that I've been really impressed with throughout the process. So I think he's probably going to go in that sixth or seventh round range, but it wouldn't surprise me if he sticks on the roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, I appreciate you for having me. Like I said, I love seeing young talent really ascend to the top.
Mhm.
So just keep doing what you're doing. keep at it and just keep working your tail off.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the kind words and can't thank you enough for coming on. Again, big thanks to Jordan Reid for being the 62nd ever Highlight Haven interview guest. And as always, we will see you next time.